Live from Quito, Ecuador, I'm Sweeney Gray and this is From the South, the midday news brief from Tell Us Your English. We start this new edition right now. Chileans will be going back to the polls on December 17th after no candidate won an absolute majority in Sunday's first round of the presidential election. As expected, the former president, Sebastián Piñera, representing the right, led the ballot. But the candidates of the left and center-left did better than expected. More details in the next report.
Election day ended in Chile with a total turnout of 46%. With over 90% of the votes counted, Sebastián Piñera and Alejandro Guiller will face each other in the second round. Even though the right-wing candidate came first with 37% of the votes, he was far from reaching the results predicted by opinion polls.
In 4 more weeks, us Chileans will have to choose between change and continuity, between unity and division, between dialogue or digging up the past, between the future and the past, between progress and stagnation.
At the campaign headquarters of Alejandro Guiller, supporters of the center-left government candidate celebrated his success in reaching the second round. Several of President Michelle Bachelet's ministers joined in thanking the other candidates for their backing in the runoff.
I want to say a very special thanks to Carolina Goik, who called me a few minutes ago to express her satisfaction with our triumph, and also my particular affection and thanks after our long working relationship for the call I got from Beatriz Sanchez, a woman of great bravery who has done a great job.
The big surprise in the elections were the results for the left-wing Frente Amplio, with Beatriz Sanchez taking over 20%. The party also increased its number of seats in parliament to 20, plus 1 senator.
I want to send a message, a very clear message, to all the polls that said that we were going to be way down. Where is the oracle that is the CEP pollster now, which tried to erase us from the map?
Not everything was celebration. The new composition of the Congress leaves the Christian democracy in a minority. The party will discuss this Monday whether to support Alejandro Guiller in the next round. On the other hand, the right-wing coalition Chile Vamos got a high vote in both houses, while the new faces of the broad front have emerged as the third force in parliament. But who supports who in the second round has yet to be confirmed.
If you take a look at the agendas of Alejandro Guiller, of Beatriz Sanchez, of Carolina Goik, and Meo, there's a big convergence. For example, I can list diversifying exports, decentralization, pensions, health, and free education.
With a month to go before the second round, both candidates say they will start working immediately. Time is short and the support of other parties is not yet clear. The polls already show it will be a tight race for the presidency on December 17th.
And our correspondent in Santiago, Dago Martinez, has more on the next steps for Chile.
Today is the day after the elections that took place here in Chile yesterday. The results are already well known, but let's remind viewers, Sebastián Piñera, the right-wing candidate from the coalition named Chile Vamos, got 36.6% of the votes. The candidate from Fuerza de la Mayoría, Alejandro Guiller, who represents a continuation of the current administration of President Michelle Bachelet, obtained 22.6%. In third place, we have Beatriz Sanchez, the candidate from the Frente Amplio. So, who is going to be the next president? It's not clear yet, since the top 2 candidates will face each other in the runoff. They are Sebastián Piñera and Alejandro Guillet. I must say that there's a big surprise in this election, and it was the third place for Beatriz Sánchez. Her coalition, Frente Amplio, is barely a year old, and it is already performing this well. Also, there were parliamentary elections, and the results are kind of complex, precisely because now we have a new caucus from this new coalition, the Frente Amplio. An interesting fact is that the turnout this time was less than the one that we had in the 2012 elections. The turnout was 47%, and that means that there was 53% of absentation. Analysts were warning that the turnout was going to be low, and they were right. In the 2012 elections, the participation was 51%. So now we have had 4% less, and it looks like this trend is going to continue. What is next? Well, from now until December the 17th, when we will have the runoff, the candidates Piñera and Guillet will try to approach the rest of the candidates to see if they can count on their votes and generate new alliances to win. Of course, we will be here bringing you the most updated information, so stay tuned to Telesur.
Dago Martinez with that report. Thousands of people demonstrated outside the U.S. Congress on Sunday to demand better treatment for Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria devastated the island. The protesters demanded the cancellation of Puerto Rico's $73 billion debt and the repeal of the Jones Act, which limits foreign ships carrying aid to the colonial territory. Among the speakers were members of Congress, celebrities, and activists.
We are not demanding handouts. We're demanding justice. When we ask for them to eliminate the Jones Act, we are demanding justice. When we demand that they cancel the debt of Puerto Rico, we are demanding justice. When we demand for them to rebuild Puerto Rico, we are demanding justice.
So let's go live now to Washington and our correspondent Jorge Gestoso. Hello, Jorge. Thank you so much for joining us. So what exactly were the protesters yesterday demanding? And is there any sign that the Trump administration is actually listening?
In one word, what they're really demanding is stop what they believe that is discrimination. They believe and they demand that the U.S. Congress and also President Trump treat Puerto Ricans with the same importance and give the same importance to the relief of Puerto Rico as they do with the other states. For example, Texas and Florida, that they were also suffering some natural disasters. $40 million has been approved by the U.S. Congress as a help release, but the Puerto Ricans believe that that is not enough. Also, they believe that most definitely there's a new phenomenon going on, that is 140,000 Puerto Ricans has left the island coming to the mainland in order to redo their lives. About 14,000 students among them, so they're creating a new phenomenon here in the U.S. But most of they say, we basically demand to be treated exactly as U.S. citizens as we are as the rest of the country. And they do believe that today, 2 months after the pass of the Hurricane Maria, about 50% of the island is still without power, without electricity, and thousands of people without water, something that they understand that is absolutely impossible to accept, impossible to justify a country that is supposed to be the richest country in the world with 3.5 American citizens as the Puerto Ricans are. They really request that they accept the Congress and the President to treat them with the same importance and at the same speed as they're working on the relief of other parts of the country, as California, as Texas, and as Florida.
Thank you so much for that. So we've been talking to Jorge Gestoso, our correspondent in Washington, D.C., about that protest, which is calling on the U.S. government to respond favorably to the crisis in Puerto Rico. Other news now. The cost of rebuilding Dominica is just over $200 million, according to the island's Minister of Commerce, Rosalind Paul. She says 97% of that will fund the reconstruction of buildings and other infrastructure, and just over $4 million will go to the cost of human resources, including therapy. The minister detailed how the government was moving to aid the private sector in its recovery.
Government has already been putting mechanisms in place towards recovery, and you would realize that the government has already put in place duty-free concessions, the waiver of VAT on building materials and other relevant supplies as we move towards recovery, and which would benefit the sector, the private sector and small businesses who are ready to move on with rebuilding.
Violence erupted in Haiti as the president's move to reinstate the army after 22 years triggered huge protests. Hundreds of protesters took over the streets of Port-au-Prince, enraged over the controversial return of the army after 2 decades. The protesters threw rocks at police, barricaded roads by burning tires, and attacked several vehicles. The police fired shots in the air and threw tear gas at the demonstrators to control the crowd. And we have more news in minutes, so stay with us. Chile is not the only Latin American country in electoral mode. In Honduras, presidential candidates have held their closing rallies ahead of next Sunday's elections. The streets of Tegucigalpa were flooded by supporters of the opposing candidates on the last day of campaigning for the presidential and parliamentary elections. Recent opinion polls have put President Hernandez of the Conservative National Party, who's seeking a controversial second term, ahead of other candidates. Our correspondent, Gilda Silvestrucci, has more details.
This morning, the distribution of the electoral packages to the occidental and northern area of the country began. Schools and electoral colleges have already been assigned military forces to guard the ballot boxes. The presidential candidates held massive events for the final day of their campaigns. Starting tomorrow, candidates will only be able to use media outlets to talk about their campaign proposals. Today is the last political public event, and it would be held by the representative of the Leftist Alliance of Opposition against the dictatorship, Salvador. This is the news update on the ground about the electoral process in Honduras.
Hoy es el último día destinado para campaña política, así que Gilda Silvestrucci with that report. And Colombia too is gearing up for elections. The Liberal Party has chosen its candidate for the 2018 presidential elections. Our correspondent Lorena Jodios has more details.
Colombia is preparing for the presidential elections in 2018. The Liberal Party, one of the most traditional in Colombia, consulted all of its members to choose their candidate. Members had to choose between Juan Fernando Cristo, who worked as a Minister of the Interior for President Juan Manuel Santos, and Humberto de la Calle, the government representative during the peace talks with the FARC. It was Humberto de la Calle who ultimately won the nomination with more than 40,000 votes ahead of Juan Fernando Cristo. The Liberal Party's nominee said that he will defend the peace agreements and that he is open to join forces with other political parties to strengthen what was resolved with the FARC during the peace talks. Nevertheless, many sectors have denounced that Congress is transforming the implementation of the peace agreements that took place in Havana, as their members are using this to benefit their electoral interests, and that this is destroying what was achieved. Humberto de la Calle joins more than 20 pre-candidates that want to participate in the presidential elections.
Lorena Hoyos with that report. Thousands of Mexicans left homeless by September's earthquakes have been marching through the capital. They want more effective aid from the government. Details in the next report.
The victims from the September 19th earthquake marched throughout the streets of Mexico City. Thousands of families who were left homeless after the earthquake and are still living in temporary shelters, they have decided to keep protesting until their concerns are heard by the government.
Until our houses are reconstructed, until we get a decent home, we will remain here, protesting and closing streets.
The government, along with financial institutions, are proposing to those who lost their homes that they can rebuild their homes by getting a 30-year credit, a proposal considered unfair by the owners of the damaged homes.
They are a mockery from the Mexican people. They think we live with huge salaries and we don't. People don't have money to pay for those greedy credits.
A fundamental request is for the funds of the Natural Damages Trust Fund to be made public, and especially the international donations that the country received.
This situation is a disgrace for us, but there's also other people who helped us. With that support from the world, we have enough for reconstructions.
We won't allow this. Reconstruction can't happen through banks. It should be through people and organized people.
It's estimated that the September earthquakes left over 200,000 people without homes throughout the country, a national emergency that experts say it will take years to be solved. The calculation for the total reconstruction is over $2.5 billion. Nevertheless, the National Congress approved its 2018 budget only $125 million for the reconstruction.
The search for the missing Argentinian Navy submarine continues in the South Atlantic, as the authorities say they received a satellite call that rose hopes of finding the 44 crew members alive. More than a dozen boats and aircrafts from Britain, the United States, Chile and Brazil have joined the rescue efforts amid stormy weather, which has made the search operation even more difficult. The Navy submarine disappeared on Wednesday near Argentina's coast in the Gulf of San Jorge. Our correspondent in Argentina, Edgardo Esteban, sent this report.
This
is the fifth day since the Ara San Juan submarine disappeared in Argentina's southern sea, near Madrid port. The Navy submarine was traveling from Ushuaia to the city of Mar del Plata as the crew members made contact around 7:20 in the morning, the last one made by the submarine. Authorities received 7 satellite calls on Saturday, although they were not able to assure if these calls were made by crew members in the submarine or the exact location they were coming from. Army personnel and authorities are working hard to find alive the 44 missing with the support of Chile, Britain and the United States that are helping trace the missing Navy submarine with boats and aircrafts. The stormy weather has made the search even more complicated. The rain, strong wind and high waves have been an obstacle to rush the search. Family members from the missing crew are worried, especially because they haven't received any information. The search team is expected to arrive to Mar del Plata today, to the Navy base located there, as people are waiting for new information on the status of the Ara San Juan submarine.
Edgardo Esteban with that report. Thousands of people marched and celebrated in Rio de Janeiro's Gay Pride Parade, packing Copacabana Beach despite the ultra-conservative mayor's opposition to the event. With Mayor Marcelo Crivella, an evangelical Christian in office, it was the first time in 22 years that city funds were barred for paying for part of the parade. Crivella was also less than beloved for saying he would cut back on funding to Rio's Samba schools, the social groups that work year-round to prepare floats for the legendary carnival. Local media estimate that 800,000 people took part in the celebration.
The importance of the Gay Pride Parade is that we're seeking equal rights. Today is the 22nd LGBTI parade of Copacabana. So we're here to resist prejudice and fight against the idea of a gay cure, which doesn't exist. It's not an option. We were born like this. So the parade is in the name of our equal rights.
Also this Monday, Brazil is celebrating Black Consciousness Day to highlight some of the most pressing issues affecting the Afro-Brazilian resistance in the country. Our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Ignacio Limas, has more details.
Saludos estudio, nos encontramos en la ciudad de Sao Paulo frente.
We are in Sao Paulo, just in front of the Museum of Art, where hundreds of people from social movements are gathering for Black Consciousness Day, a day that was established by the government of former President Lula da Silva in 2003. This to commemorate the life and resistance of Afro-Brazilian leader Zumbi dos Palmares, On this day, social movements are defending all that has been achieved regarding education for the Black community, with scholarship programs that have allowed the community to increase to 30% the representation in universities in 10 years. They are also protesting against the violence that the Black youth from the favelas have to face from the police. In Sao Paulo alone, Black youth are killed 4 times more than from other communities, and in Rio de Janeiro, 9 out of 10 killings by the police affect the Black communities living in the outskirts of the city. The Black community is defending their own rights today.
Ignacio Limas with that report. Around 50 journalists in El Salvador have gathered to protest and demand justice after the murder of cameraman Samuel Rivas by gang members. The journalists are demanding that the authorities guarantee a secure work environment after Samuel Rivas was shot in the city of Ilopango, just outside the capital. According to the Institute of Legal Medicine, there have been over 2,800 homicides in the past 8 months. This weekend ended the Continental Conference for Democracy Against Neoliberalism, hosted in Montevideo, Uruguay. The plenary approved a document that called for the union of Latin American people. It also condemned the Cuban blockade and the harassment of Venezuela. And it also called for an action plan against transnational companies.
I really believe that today we can talk with more conviction against capitalism, against imperialism, the two main forces that coordinate the political moment. And we are looking for an identity against them. We are recovering an identity by talking about class.
We're demonstrating that there's a fight. There's a big struggle against this right-wing attack and it having any place on our continent. And we're going to face it.
The land is central for us, the land and our territories, because they hold the life and the culture of our people.
We recognize the countries that are fighting, the revolutionary and progressive actions that take place on the continent. They are the spearhead of our continent's resistance.
And we'll be back very soon, so stay with us. Zimbabwe's ruling party, ZANU-PF, is preparing to impeach its president, Robert Mugabe, after the deadline for him to step down came and went unheeded. The War Veterans Organization has announced they will support a court challenge to legalize military action against Mugabe and lead public protests to put pressure on the 93-year-old leader.
And we have gone to the court today. We are hoping that the case is registered to say that Mugabe, he was derelict of his executive duty, forcing the head of the army to intervene to arrest the criminals. And the army is now done its job. And the people of Zimbabwe on Saturday took off from where the army had left.
Following ZANU-PF's Friday announcement calling for Mugabe's removal as leader of the party and the country, hundreds of thousands of Zimbabweans took to the streets to celebrate his fall. But in an address to the nation on Sunday, alongside military generals, Mugabe announced that he would stay as head of the party, complicating the new plans to ratify the appointment of former Vice President Mnangagwa as the new leader of the country in a special Congress scheduled for December.
I will preside over its processes, which must not be prepossessed by any acts calculated to undermine it or to compromise the outcomes in the eyes of the public.
Zimbabwe now awaits more news on how the impeachment progress will and can progress to remove a leader who has held on to power for 37 years.
And now let's take a look at some of the other stories that are making headlines around the world.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel is facing her biggest challenge yet, as talks on forming a coalition government have collapsed. The Free Democrats Party withdrew from the talks after more than 4 weeks of fruitless negotiations with Merkel's conservative bloc and the environmentalist Greens, saying there was not enough common ground. The collapse raises the prospects of new elections. The far-right AfD party welcomed the news.
Mrs. Merkel has failed. It's time for her now to take a step back. We are happy about the fact that Mrs. Merkel has failed because it wouldn't have been a new beginning, rather a continuation. We are happy that the Greens take on no responsibility as their domestic policies concerning refugees and energy transition were totally flawed.
While Merkel has said she prefers an election rerun over a minority coalition, German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier has said that he expects all elected parties to be ready for talks to enable a government to be formed.
This is the moment where all the parties involved need to stop for a moment and rethink their position. All political parties that have been voted into the German parliament are committed to the public interest. They serve our country. I expect all of them to be ready to talk to try to form a government in the near future.
Kenya's Supreme Court has upheld President Uhuru Kenyatta's victory in October's election rerun, which was boycotted by the opposition party NASA. Supporters of the opposition leader Raila Odinga took to the streets and several people were injured in sporadic clashes with the police. The Supreme Court dismissed 2 petitions brought before them, therefore validating the October 26 results.
Having carefully considered the above issues, the specific prayers in each petition, as well as the Constitution and the applicable laws, the Court has unanimously determined that the petitions are not merited.
Iraqi Supreme Court has ruled that the Kurdish independence referendum was unconstitutional. The ruling comes nearly 2 months after the vote, in which 92% of Iraqi Kurds supported secession. According to a statement, the Supreme Court also annulled all the consequences and results of the referendum. Lebanese Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri is confirmed to return to Lebanon for Independence Day celebrations on November 22nd and officially resign from his post. The news comes after al-Hariri's talks with French President Emmanuel Macron on Saturday. This was part of French mediation efforts aimed at trying to ease tensions across the region. At least 3 people have died in India after a 4-story plastics factory collapsed in the northern state of Punjab. Dozens of people are feared to be trapped in the debris. Rescue workers are sifting through the rubble in an attempt to find survivors and bodies. The collapse came hours after fire. The cause of the fire is not yet known.
And with that, we've come to the end of this midday news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website, tellusyourtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I am Sunny Gray. Thank you so much for watching.